My name is Claire Merritt, 34 years old, a licensed paralegal living in Columbus, Ohio, and I have spent most of my life being the daughter my parents forgot to include. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. I mean, they scheduled a professional family portrait, loaded everyone into the minivan, drove to the studio on a Saturday morning, posed under the lights, and came home without me. No phone call, no turned-around car. Just a driveway, a closed garage door, and a 13-year-old girl standing in her socks still holding her shoes. The finished photo was framed and hung in the living room within 2 weeks. I counted the faces every time I walked past it. 8 of them. My father, Gerald, my mother, Diane, my brother, Dylan, my sister, Amber, Amber's husband, their 2 kids, and my grandmother, Ruth. 8 faces in matching outfits under warm studio lighting. Me, nowhere. I told myself it was an accident the first time. Families are chaotic. People get overlooked. These things happen. Then it happened again at Christmas. Then again in the Easter card they mailed to 40 relatives. And each time I brought it up, the explanation shifted just enough to never quite be an apology. I learned to stop expecting one. But here is the part I did not know until a courtroom forced it into the open. The erasure was not just symbolic. My name was also missing from the deed to the house my grandmother Ruth left to our family when she passed in March of 2023. A house sitting on a quiet street in Dublin, Ohio, valued at $340,000. Gerald, Dylan, and Amber were named. I was not. A judge looked at that document and asked one question. A single, quiet, devastating question that my parents could not answer without lying under oath. I want to take you inside that courtroom. But first, I need you to understand what kind of family builds that kind of document, and what kind of daughter spends 20 years convincing herself she is the problem before she finally stops. So before we get to the judge and the deed and the moment everything shifted, I need to take you back to that driveway in 2004. 13 years old, socks on concrete, watching taillights disappear around the corner. Ask yourself honestly right now, would you have stayed quiet as long as I did, or would you have walked out sooner? Stay with me, because the photo is only the beginning of what they erased. My father, Gerald Merritt, ran our household the way a CFO runs a mid-size company. Every resource was allocated with intention. Every decision came down from him fully formed, no discussion, no appeals process, no revision. He did not yell often. He did not need to. The architecture of the house operated around his approval, and everyone inside it knew which behaviors earned that approval and which ones quietly disqualified you. My mother Diane enforced his decisions with a warm smile and a casserole dish. She was not a cruel woman on her own terms. If you met her at church or in the grocery store, you would describe her as lovely, the kind of mother who remembered your birthday and asked about your kids. But inside our home, she functioned as a mirror, and that mirror only reflected what Gerald approved of. When he looked away from something, she looked away too. When he decided I was the difficult one, she agreed without saying it out loud. Dylan was the golden child in the most textbook sense of the phrase. Athletic, loud, magnetically likable in the way that teenage boys are when adults have decided to invest fully in them. Gerald coached his Little League team for 9 consecutive years. I counted the games once, going through old schedules and photographs when I was in my 20s trying to make sense of my own childhood. 112 games. Gerald was present for every single one. Amber was the middle child who learned early that alignment was survival. She did not fight for Dylan's status. She simply stayed quiet when Gerald spoke and close to Dylan when Gerald was watching. It was a reasonable strategy. I understood it even then. I was the youngest. I was also the one who asked questions. Why does Dylan get a savings account and I get a card? Why was I not invited to Hocking Hills? Why does the Christmas card have 7 people when 8 people live in this house? That habit of asking made me the problem child before I was old enough to understand what that label would cost me. My grandmother Ruth kept a photo album on her coffee table that she called the whole family book. Every page had my face in it. Ruth's version of us was complete. Gerald's version, the one framed on the living room wall, told an entirely different story. And the question nobody thought to ask back then was a simple one. Whose version of this family was the legally binding one? The driveway moment in 2004 was not the first erasure. It was simply the first one I could name out loud, the first one with enough witnesses and enough silence afterward to make me stop explaining it away. The first one I can trace with certainty happened in the summer of 2001. My father organized a camping trip to Hocking Hills State Park, one of those father and children weekends that sounds like a core memory when you describe it to someone else. He packed the truck on a Friday evening. He booked 3 sleeping bags, one for himself, one for Dylan, one for Amber. I found out they were gone the next morning when our neighbor Mrs. Patterson mentioned she had seen them loading up the night before and asked if I had fun. I was 10 years old. Dylan was 11. When they came back, I asked my father directly why I had not been included. He looked at me with the particular patience of someone who has already decided the conversation is not worth having, and said I was too young. I did not argue. I was 10, and I still believed his explanations were honest. In 2006, my grandmother Ruth set up college savings accounts for her grandchildren. Amber and Dylan each received $5,000, deposited and documented. I received a birthday card with a $20 bill tucked inside and a handwritten note that said, "Keep working hard, sweetheart." I kept that card for years because Ruth's handwriting made it feel like love. What I did not know until Ruth told me herself, quietly, near the end of her life, was that she had sent Gerald money for all 3 of her grandchildren. He had made a decision about where my portion went, and he had never mentioned it to me or to her again. In 2009, the family Christmas card went out to 40 relatives and family friends, 7 faces. Gerald said the photographer ran out of time before they could get a shot with everyone. I was 15. I had been home all afternoon. In plain numbers, the hidden cost of those years looked like this: $5,000 in missing savings I never received. 112 baseball games attended without me in the stands. 3 consecutive holidays spent quietly trying to prove I belonged to the family eating dinner 20 feet away. These were not oversights. They were a system, and systems do not build themselves by accident. On a Tuesday morning in March 2023, my grandmother Ruth died at age 81 in a hospice facility in Dublin, Ohio. I had been there since the night before, sitting in a chair beside her bed, holding her hand while the monitors beeped softly and the hallway stayed quiet. She passed at 6:14 in the morning. It was still dark outside. I stayed with her for a while after, just sitting, just breathing. The way you do when someone who always made you feel seen is suddenly gone. My parents arrived at 7:30 after the nurse placed the call. Gerald walked through the door, moved past me without a word or a glance, and asked the nurse which doctor was managing the estate paperwork. Not how she went, not whether I was all right. Estate paperwork. 3 days later, my mother sent me a text message. It read, Grandma left the house to the family and the lawyer will be in touch." That was the entire message. No phone call, no conversation. 11 words and a period. I want you to sit with that word for a moment. Family. I had heard it my entire life used as a reason to give more to some people and less to others. I had heard it at holiday tables where my seat felt provisional. I had heard it in voicemails and Christmas cards and camping trip explanations, and not once in 34 years had that word ever felt like it fully included me. When the estate attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen, sent the initial deed summary by email 4 days after Ruth's funeral, I read it slowly. Then I read it again. Then twice more because I wanted to be certain I was not misreading something in my grief. Gerald Merritt. Dylan Merritt. Amber Merritt Caldwell. 3 names. Property value listed at $340,000. My name was not on the document. I did not cry. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, and then I did 3 things in order. I printed the email. I placed it carefully inside Ruth's photo album, the whole family book, right behind the last page. And the following morning, I called a real estate attorney named Marcus Webb, whose name I had saved 2 years earlier without knowing why. Something about that absence did not feel like an oversight this time. It felt chosen. Marcus Webb had handled probate disputes in Franklin County for 19 years. His office was on the 3rd floor of a building on East Broad Street, small and organized, the kind of space that tells you the person behind the desk has seen enough chaos to value order. He read through the deed summary I had printed, read it a second time, and then looked at me across the desk with an expression that was not surprise, so much as recognition. He said what I had was not consistent with what a standard per stirpes inheritance would produce if Ruth had genuinely intended to include all her grandchildren equally. In plain terms, if Ruth meant for 3 grandchildren to share the property, all 3 names belonged on that document. Only 3 were there. The math did not reflect the intention, and in probate law, that gap matters. And then he asked me one question. Had Ruth ever said anything specific to me about the house? I opened my bag and placed a letter on his desk. Ruth had given it to me on my 25th birthday, folded inside a card with her usual careful handwriting on the envelope. In the letter, she wrote that the house was meant for all 3 of my grandchildren equally, the way the photo album holds all 3 equally. She had used that exact comparison, the album and the house, in the same sentence. I had read that letter so many times the fold lines had gone soft. Marcus called that letter Layer 1. Layer 2 was a voicemail saved on my phone from January 2023, 2 months before Ruth passed. Her voice was quieter than usual but clear. She said she had signed paperwork with the lawyer and that the lawyer had told her it included everyone. She sounded relieved when she said it. Marcus filed for a formal review of the deed and the full estate documentation before the end of that week. Gerald's response came within days. He called my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, and told her I was having a breakdown from grief and making accusations against the family. Aunt Carol called me to warn me, which I do not think was the outcome Gerald intended. So I want to ask you something directly. If someone reframed your evidence as a mental health crisis to keep you quiet, would that stop you, or would it harden you? It hardened me. The probate hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning in September 2023 at the Franklin County Courthouse in Columbus. I had been inside that building dozens of times for work, pulling records, filing documents, sitting in hallways with clients. I knew the smell of it, the sound of the elevators, the particular echo of footsteps on the marble floors near the probate division. I had never walked in as the person whose name was missing from a document. Gerald and Diane arrived together, dressed in coordinating navy outfits that looked deliberate without being obvious about it. Dylan came in a suit and tie, his expression carefully neutral. Amber sat beside my mother in the hallway and did not look at me once in the 20 minutes we shared that space. Their attorney, a man named Howard Finch, carried a leather binder that was genuinely the size of a small suitcase. He set it on his knees and reviewed papers with the focused energy of someone who believed he had already won. 10 minutes before we were called in, my father walked over to me. He left the rest of his group and crossed the hallway and stopped close enough that his voice would not carry. He said, in a tone so familiar it almost felt like childhood, that I was always the one who made things harder than they needed to be. Then he walked back to his seat. I want to be precise about what that moment was. It was the second public humiliation in this story. The first lasted 11 years and hung on the living room wall. This one lasted 4 seconds in a courthouse hallway. But it was different from every prior dismissal because it was the last one he would ever get to deliver to someone who had no power to respond. I turned to Marcus. He was already holding a folder out toward me. Inside was a document I had not seen before that morning. It was the original copy of Ruth's estate intention letter, the one she had filed directly with her financial advisor in 2019, 4 years before she died. It listed all 3 grandchildren by name. My name was on that version. The hearing was starting in 11 minutes. Marcus nodded once, and I held the folder against my chest and breathed. Before I take you inside that courtroom, I need you to answer something honestly in the comments. Do you think I should have settled this quietly? Or was I right to let the judge decide? The Honorable Sandra Keller had served Franklin County Probate Court for 16 years. She entered the room without ceremony, sat down, and began reading the documents in front of her before anyone had fully settled. She had the particular stillness of someone who has heard every version of every family story and is no longer moved by presentation, only by evidence. Howard Finch presented first. He was polished and methodical, and he had clearly prepared for a straightforward afternoon. He argued that Ruth had verbally amended her wishes during the final years of her life, that the 3 named parties on the deed reflected her considered and final intent, and that the filing had been executed properly under Ohio probate law. He used the word clarity 4 times. I counted because it felt like a strategy, as if saying the word often enough would make the document's omission feel purposeful rather than engineered. Judge Keller listened without interruption. Then she looked down at the deed. Then she looked up. She said she was noticing only 3 names on the document and that the decedent had 4 biological grandchildren. She asked if that was correct. Finch said Ruth had her reasons. Judge Keller said, evenly and without raising her voice, that she would like to hear those reasons supported by documentation. Marcus stood. He presented the evidence in deliberate order. First, the 2019 letter filed with Ruth's financial advisor, which listed all 4 grandchildren by name as equal beneficiaries of the property. Second, Ruth's handwritten birthday letter to me, and in which she had compared the house to the photo album and stated her intention that all 3 grandchildren share it equally. Third, the voicemail from January 2023, which Marcus had transferred to an audio file and requested permission to play aloud. The courtroom was completely quiet when Ruth's voice came through the speaker. She sounded like herself, careful and warm, saying she had signed paperwork and that the lawyer had told her it included everyone. Dylan stared at his hands. Amber began crying quietly with no sound. My father's jaw went rigid in the way it always did when a situation had moved outside his control. Judge Keller removed her glasses and looked directly at my parents. She said the document pattern before her suggested the recorded deed may not reflect the decedent's actual intent, and that she was ordering a full review of the estate. I did not smile. I did not exhale loudly or look at Gerald. I sat still and let the room do the work. The boundary I had waited 34 years to draw had just been drawn in public by someone with a gavel, and it had cost me nothing but patience. The review took 63 days. I went to work, attended my Thursday support group, cooked meals, called Dana, and tried to live inside regular time while the legal process moved at its own pace. Marcus updated me every 2 weeks. I did not call him in between. I had learned by then that the truth does not move faster because you are anxious about it. Judge Keller issued her ruling on a Wednesday morning in December 2023. She found that the deed as filed did not reflect Ruth's documented intent and ordered the estate to be restructured to include my rightful share as an equal beneficiary alongside Gerald, Dylan, and Amber. Marcus called me at 9:45 in the morning. I was sitting at my desk at work. I thanked him, hung up, and sat quietly for several minutes before I told anyone. My share of the estate, after legal fees and the costs of the sale process, came to $85,000. Gerald did not call. He did not appear at my door. He sent a 2-sentence email routed through Howard Finch that said the matter had been resolved and that he hoped we could all move on. I read it once and archived it without responding. Dylan called me about a week after the ruling. He said he had not known about Ruth's letter to the financial advisor and that if he had known, he would have said something. His voice was uncomfortable in the way that voices are when a person is being honest, but knows the honesty is arriving late. I told him I believed him. I also told him I needed time before I could figure out what our relationship looked like going forward. Amber mailed me a card. There was no written message inside, just her signature. Kirsten, the same looping handwriting she has had since high school. My mother left a voicemail sometime in January. She said she hoped that when things settled down we could meet somewhere for coffee and just talk. Her voice sounded tired. I listened to the message twice and did not call her back that week. None of this resembled the reconciliation scenes that play out in films, where someone cries the right amount and says exactly the words that heal everything. Real consequences move slowly and land quietly, often in envelopes and voicemails and signatures with no message attached. I closed the loop on 30 years of erasure with $85,000, one court order, and a judge who refused to look away from a name that was not there. 6 months after the ruling, the house sold. And sometime during the move, the portrait came down from the wall. By the spring of 2024, I had made 3 decisions with the first portion of my inheritance, and each one felt like returning something to myself that had been withheld for a long time. I took 3 months off work, which I had never done in my adult life. I paid off my student loans in a single transfer on a Tuesday afternoon, then sat at my kitchen table and looked at the zero balance on the screen for a while. And I made an appointment with a therapist named Dr. Yolanda Harris, whose office was in Westerville, Ohio, about 20 minutes from my apartment. I started seeing her every other week and kept going. Marcus had mentioned, almost as an aside during one of our later conversations, that he occasionally referred clients to a support group for adult children of narcissistic family systems that met weekly in Columbus. I wrote down the information and waited 2 months before I used it. Then I attended every Thursday for 5 months without missing a single session. I did not share much at first. I mostly listened to other people describe childhoods that sounded like mine in the particular details that you never expect anyone else to know. The way a parent's silence can feel louder than shouting. The specific exhaustion of spending decades trying to earn something that was never going to be offered. My chosen family grew steadily and without announcement. My college roommate Dana, who had known me since I was 18 and had never once made me feel like a burden, became the person I called first for every milestone and every difficult afternoon. My coworker Jerome organized a dinner at his house in April for my 35th birthday. 8 people came. There was a cake. Someone took photographs. Ruth's photo album sits on the middle shelf of my bookcase now. I added 1 photograph to the back and side cover, tucked carefully against the binding the way Ruth used to tuck things she wanted to keep. It shows me and Dana and Jerome and 3 other friends sitting at a picnic table in Schiller Park on a Saturday afternoon in August. The light is good. Everyone is laughing at something just outside the frame. All the faces are present. Nobody is cropped. Nobody is missing. I had the photo printed at a shop on High Street, and written along the bottom edge in small, careful letters is the phrase, "The whole family." That was the phrase Ruth used for her album. I borrowed it for mine. The last loop closed quietly, without ceremony, on the day I realized I had stopped waiting for my parents to include me in their picture, and had simply made my own. Here is what I want you to take from this, if you take nothing else. The people who erase you rarely do it once. They do not make a single careless mistake and course correct. They build a system, quietly and over years, and that system depends entirely on your silence to keep functioning. Every time you explained it away, Every time you told yourself it was an accident or that you were being too sensitive, you were not failing yourself. You were doing what people do when they have been taught since childhood that their own perception is the problem. Documents do not lie the way people do. A deed has no memory to protect. A voicemail does not revise itself to sound more reasonable at a later date. A letter written in your grandmother's handwriting on your 25th birthday does not soften its meaning when the family narrative becomes inconvenient. Paper holds its shape even when the people around you are certain their version of events is the one that should survive. If you have ever felt cropped out of a family you were born into, I want you to hear this clearly. The absence you felt was real. The exclusion you kept finding ways to excuse was real. And it was not your failure. It was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of a system that required you to be less so that someone else could appear to be more. A judge seeing your name missing from a legal document is not the only way the truth surfaces, but it is one of the most clarifying ones, because it happens in a room where no one can talk over you or reframe your grief as instability. Leave me a comment and tell me something. Did someone in your family ever use the word family in a way that quietly excluded you, without explanation and without apology? Next time, I will tell you what happened when Gerald tried to contest Judge Keller's ruling. That story is shorter than this one, but the ending is just as final. The truth does not need your permission to be true. It only needs one person who is willing to stop looking away.